Wyoming Territory, 1878. The winter wind cut through the streets of Redemption Creek like a blade, but Katherine Holloway barely felt it as she pressed herself against the back wall of the general store. 23 years old and invisible, that was how she preferred it. She kept her dark brown hair pulled severely back, wore her mother's old gray dresses 2 sizes too large, and had perfected the art of looking at the ground whenever anyone passed. The burn scars on her left cheek and neck, souvenirs from a childhood accident, had taught her early that being noticed meant being pitied, whispered about, or worse, stared at with barely concealed revulsion. Katherine had learned a fundamental truth in her 23 years. The frontier was no place for softness, and love was a luxury afforded only to the beautiful and whole. She had her work at the widow Morrison's boarding house, her small attic room, and her books. That was enough. It had to be enough. She hurried down the alley toward the boarding house, her basket of supplies clutched tight. The afternoon stage would be arriving soon, bringing new boarders, and Widow Morrison expected hot coffee and fresh bread ready for any paying customers. The crack of gunfire shattered the cold air. Katherine froze as shouts erupted from Main Street. She should run, disappear into the boarding house, and bolt the door like she always did when trouble came to town. But something made her peek around the corner of the building, just one quick glance to see what danger threatened. A young man stood in the middle of the street, tall and lean in dusty trail clothes, his black hat sitting easy on his head despite the tension radiating through his frame. He couldn't have been more than 25, clean-shaven with the kind of strong jaw and steady eyes that made him handsome even covered in trail dust. His hand hovered near the gun at his hip, but he hadn't drawn it. 3 rough-looking men faced him, their guns already aimed at his chest. "Vincent Vance," one of the men called out, his voice carrying down the street. "You got no business in Redemption Creek. This is Dalton Territory now." "Last I checked," the young cowboy said calmly, "Wyoming Territory belonged to anyone willing to work honest. I came for supplies, not trouble." "You brought trouble when you rode in. Your brother killed Jake Dalton last year, and the Dalton clans got long memories." Katherine's breath caught. She knew she should leave, but her feet wouldn't move. Vincent Vance, the name was familiar. His family owned a struggling ranch about 20 miles north, barely hanging on after the harsh winters and cattle thieves had decimated their herd. She'd heard Widow Morrison mention that the youngest Vance boy was trying to keep the place running alone after his brother had fled the territory following a shootout. "My brother's gone," Vincent said, his voice steady despite the 3 guns trained on him. "Whatever blood debt you think exists, it doesn't involve me. I'm just trying to survive and keep my family's land." "Should have thought of that before." The gunman's words cut off as Sheriff Porter emerged from his office, his own rifle raised. "That's enough, Dalton. Take your boys and ride out. We don't shoot unarmed men in my town." The standoff held for another breath before the 3 men holstered their weapons with obvious reluctance. "This ain't over, Vance. Daltons don't forget." Katherine pressed back against the wall as the men mounted their horses and rode past her hiding spot. Her heart hammered against her ribs. When she dared look again, Vincent was speaking with the sheriff, his shoulders tight with tension even as he nodded his thanks. The sheriff departed, and Vincent turned toward the general store. His path would take him directly past her alley. Katherine spun to flee, but her boot caught on a broken board. She stumbled, her basket flying from her hands, supplies scattering across the dirt. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" The voice was close, concerned. Katherine kept her face turned away, scrambling to gather the scattered goods. "I'm fine." "Please, just go. At least let me help pick up your things." Strong hands gathered the fallen items with quick efficiency. Katherine kept her scarred cheek angled away, her hair falling forward to shield her face. She could smell leather and sage and horse, honest, working scents that somehow made her chest ache. "Here," Vincent said gently, placing the last items in her basket. "I think that's everything." "Thank you," she kept her voice barely above a whisper, already turning away. "Wait," something in his tone made her pause. "You're shaking. Those men scared you. I'm sorry you had to witness that." "I'm used to trouble." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "This town sees its share. Still, no one should have to be afraid just walking down the street." He paused, and she could feel his gaze on her, though she refused to meet it. "I'm Vincent." "Vincent Vance." "I know," again the words escaped unbidden. I mean, I heard them call your name. Then you have me at a disadvantage, ma'am. She shouldn't engage, she should walk away right now. But something about his voice, kind without pity, respectful without the awkwardness people usually showed her, made her throat tight. Katherine Holloway. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Holloway, even under these circumstances. He shifted, and she sensed him trying to catch her eye. Are you sure you're all right? You're still trembling. The genuine concern in his voice was too much. She clutched her basket tighter and hurried away without another word, her scarred cheek burning as if the flames had touched it anew. She didn't dare look back, didn't want to see the inevitable moment when his expression would change from kindness to uncomfortable pity. Behind her, Vincent stood in the alley, watching the strange woman disappear around the corner. Something about her had struck him like lightning in a clear sky, the desperate desire to remain unseen, the tremor in her voice that spoke of deeper hurts than any gunfight could cause. He'd only glimpsed her profile, but there'd been something achingly fragile in the curve of her neck, the delicate line of her jaw. He shook his head. He had no business thinking about women, mysterious or otherwise. The ranch was hemorrhaging money. He had supplies to buy with funds he barely had, and the Dalton clan had just made clear that his presence in Redemption Creek put a target on his back. Love, companionship, softness, those were luxuries for men with secure futures. Vincent had learned that truth when his father died, when his older brother Thomas fled after killing Jake Dalton in what should have been a fair fight, when the bank had threatened foreclosure. The frontier demanded everything from a man, left nothing for tender feelings or foolish dreams. Still, as he walked toward the general store, he found himself hoping he might see Katherine Holloway again. 3 weeks passed before Vincent returned to Redemption Creek. The encounter with the Dalton men had left him wary, but necessity drove him back. He needed feed for the horses and couldn't afford the marked-up prices from the traveling merchants. He rode in at dawn, hoping to conduct his business and leave before attracting attention. The boarding house sat on the edge of town, a weathered 2-story building with smoke curling from its chimney. Vincent had considered taking a room there instead of making the long ride back to the ranch in a single day, but his funds wouldn't stretch that far. He was tying his horse to the rail outside the general store when he heard a commotion from the boarding house porch. I don't care if Widow Morrison promised you could stay. A large man in expensive clothes stood blocking the doorway, his face red with anger. This is no hotel for every broken thing that washes up. I paid good money for a room with proper service, not to be tended by some disfigured girl who can't even look a man in the eye. Vincent's hands stilled on the reins. Through the doorway he could see a slender figure in gray, head bowed, a breakfast tray trembling in her hands. I apologize for any offense, Mr. Carlyle. The voice was soft, carefully controlled. Katherine Holloway. I'll have Widow Morrison bring your meals from now on. You'll do more than that. You'll stay out of my sight entirely. It's bad enough that. Vincent didn't remember deciding to move, but suddenly he was crossing the street, his boots loud on the wooden porch. Seems like there's some confusion here. Carlyle whirled around. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Maybe not, but I couldn't help overhearing you speaking disrespectfully to a lady. Vincent kept his voice level, but his eyes were hard. Where I come from, a man doesn't speak to women that way, paying customer or not. Lady, Carlyle's laugh was ugly. You're defending that scarred creature. I'm simply demanding proper service for my money. Vincent felt anger flare hot in his chest. Miss Holloway, is Widow Morrison available? Katherine still hadn't looked up, but she nodded slightly. She's in the kitchen. Would you mind fetching her? I think Mr. Carlyle here needs to discuss his accommodations directly with the proprietor. I'm not going anywhere until, Carlyle started, but Vincent took a single step closer, close enough that the larger man had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. I think you are, Vincent said quietly. In fact, I think you're going to apologize to Miss Holloway for your rudeness, then you're going to conduct your business with proper respect, or you're going to find lodging elsewhere. Redemption Creek might be rough around the edges, but we don't tolerate bullies. For a moment, Carlyle looked like he might argue, but something in Vincent's steady gaze made him reconsider. He turned to Katherine with obvious reluctance. My apologies for the harsh words, Miss Holloway. The words were grudging, but Vincent nodded acceptance. Katherine slipped past them both into the house, still without raising her eyes. After Carlyle had retreated to discuss matters with Widow Morrison, his bluster considerably deflated, Vincent found himself standing alone on the porch, wondering if he'd overstepped. He'd been raised to defend those who needed defending, but perhaps his interference had only made things worse for Katherine. He was turning to leave when the door opened again. Katherine stood in the doorway, a fresh cup of coffee in her hands. She still kept her face partially turned away, her dark brown hair hiding her left side, but she was looking at him, or at least trying to. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "That was kind." "It was necessary." "No one deserves to be spoken to that way." He hesitated. "I hope I didn't cause you trouble." "You didn't," she extended the coffee cup. "Widow Morrison wanted to offer this with her thanks as well. She's giving Mr. Carlyle his money back and sending him to the hotel." Vincent took the cup, careful not to let his fingers brush hers, though he found himself wanting that contact with an intensity that surprised him. "I'm glad. A man like that doesn't deserve your service." Most people agree with him, though. The words were matter of fact, worn smooth by repetition. They're just more polite about it. "Then most people are fools." Katherine's head jerked up in surprise, and for the first time she looked directly at him. Vincent saw the burn scars clearly now. They traced from her left cheek down her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. The skin was puckered and discolored, a stark contrast to the smooth beauty of her right side. But what struck him wasn't the scars. It was her eyes, deep brown, intelligent, full of carefully guarded pain and unexpected strength. She was beautiful. The thought hit him with absolute clarity. Not despite the scars, but as a whole, the delicate features, the expressive eyes, the grace in how she held herself. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with the life and soul shining through. Katherine saw something in his expression. She must have, because her own face flickered with confusion before she looked away again, the protective curtain of hair falling back into place. "You don't have to say kind things," she said. "The truth is what it is." "I am saying the truth." Vincent surprised himself with his vehemence. "Miss Holloway, I don't know what circumstances gave you those scars, but they don't define you. Anyone who can't see past them to the person beneath isn't worth your concern." "That's almost everyone, Mr. Vance." The defeat in her voice made his chest ache. He wanted to argue, to somehow make her see herself as he saw her, but he recognized the futility. This was a wound that ran deeper than any scar tissue, carved by years of rejection and casual cruelty. "Well," he said finally, "then I'm proud to be among the rare few who have the sense to see clearly." He finished the coffee and returned the cup with a nod of thanks, then headed back to his horse. He had supplies to buy and a long ride ahead. But as he conducted his business in the general store, he found his thoughts drifting constantly back to Katherine Holloway and the carefully constructed walls he'd seen in her eyes. Katherine watched from the boarding house window as Vincent rode out of town, his figure straight and easy in the saddle. She pressed her fingers to the glass, then jerked them away as if burned. She couldn't afford to read too much into his words. Men said kind things sometimes, especially strong men who fancied themselves protectors. It didn't mean anything. It especially didn't mean he saw her as anything other than a pitiable creature in need of defending. Except the way he'd looked at her when their eyes met, there'd been no pity there, no uncomfortable avoidance or forced politeness. Just a straightforward gaze that had seemed to see past all her carefully constructed defenses. "He's a good man, that Vincent Vance." Widow Morrison came to stand beside her, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. The older woman was perhaps 50, weathered by frontier life but still sharp-eyed and kind. "Reminds me of his father, same honest heart." "You knew his family?" "Before you came to town, yes. They had a fine ranch once before the troubles started. Lost most of their herd 2 winters back, then his father died of pneumonia. The older boy, Thomas, killed Jake Dalton in a gunfight last year, self-defense by all accounts, but the Daltons don't care about the details. Thomas fled to California, left young Vincent to hold the ranch alone." She shook her head. "That boy's been fighting an uphill battle ever since, trying to rebuild what was lost." Katherine felt something twist in her chest. So Vincent Vance was carrying his own burdens, fighting his own losing battle against the harsh realities of frontier life. Perhaps that was why his kindness had felt so genuine. He understood struggle, understood what it meant to be judged unfairly. "He stood up for you twice now," Widow Morrison continued, her tone carefully neutral. That's noteworthy. He would have done the same for anyone. Perhaps, but he didn't look at you the way most people look at anyone. The widow patted Catherine's shoulder. Don't be so quick to dismiss kindness, child. It's rarer than gold out here and more valuable. Catherine didn't answer. She couldn't explain that accepting kindness felt more dangerous than rejection. Rejection, she understood, had built her life around. But kindness, genuine interest, the possibility that someone might see her as something other than broken, that threatened the careful equilibrium she'd constructed. Because if she let herself hope, let herself believe that someone like Vincent Vance could truly see her as worthy of affection, the inevitable disappointment would destroy her. Better to remain the ugly duckling, safe in her isolation, than to reach for something beautiful and have it dissolve like morning mist. The next month brought an early spring to Wyoming Territory. The snow melted in rushing streams, and the prairie began showing hints of green. Vincent threw himself into ranch work with desperate determination, knowing that this was his last real chance to save the family land. If he couldn't build the herd and make a profit by fall, the bank would foreclose. He tried not to think about Katherine Holloway. He had no business letting his thoughts drift to her gentle voice, her intelligent eyes, the way she'd looked at him with such surprise when he'd called her beautiful. He had nothing to offer any woman right now except debt, danger from the Daltons, and a failing ranch. But memory was stubborn. When he worked alone on the range, riding fence lines or tracking strays, he found himself replaying their conversations. The defeat in her voice when she'd said that almost everyone saw her as lesser. The careful way she'd held herself, as if always braced for rejection. The startled hope that had flickered in her eyes before she'd shuttered it away. He wondered what had given her those scars. He wondered who had been cruel enough to make her believe she was anything less than remarkable. Most of all, he wondered if he'd ever see her again and whether she ever thought about him. The answer came on a wet April morning when his horse threw a shoe 5 miles from Redemption Creek. Vincent had been checking the northern boundary of his ranch, looking for signs of the cattle thieves who'd been plaguing the territory. The sudden lameness forced him to walk the horse toward town, arriving muddy and frustrated as afternoon shadows lengthened. The boarding house seemed the most economical option. He needed to stable his horse, get the shoe replaced in the morning, and the widow's rates were fair. He could afford one night, barely. Widow Morrison greeted him warmly. "Mr. Vance, I have a room available and I'll make sure you get a proper supper. You look half-starved." "I appreciate the kindness, ma'am. Truth is, I'm hungry enough to eat leather." "Well, we'll do better than that. Catherine makes a fine stew and there's fresh bread." The widow paused, studying him with knowing eyes. "She'll be serving supper in the dining room at 6. You'll join us?" Vincent felt his pulse quicken at the prospect of seeing Catherine again, but he kept his voice casual. "I'd be honored." The room was simple but clean, and Vincent used the wash basin to scrub away the worst of the trail dirt before changing into his only clean shirt. He told himself he wasn't nervous, that the flutter in his chest was just hunger. But when he descended to the dining room and saw Catherine setting plates on the long table, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, his breath caught in his throat. She looked up at the sound of his boots on the stairs, and her eyes widened. "Mr. Vance." "Miss Holloway," he removed his hat. "It's good to see you again." Pink colored her right cheek. The left side didn't show the blush as clearly through the scarred tissue. "Your horse threw a shoe on the north trail. I'll get it fixed in the morning." He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. "How have you been?" "Well enough." She fiddled with the placement of a fork, not quite looking at him. "Busy. Spring brings travelers." "I imagine it does." He wanted to say more to find some way to keep her talking, but 2 other boarders entered the dining room, a merchant and his wife, both greeting Catherine with polite but impersonal nods. Supper was excellent, the stew rich and flavorful, the bread perfect. Vincent found himself watching Catherine as she served, noting the efficient grace of her movements, the way she anticipated needs without being asked. She kept her scarred side turned away from the other diners as much as possible, an unconscious habit that made his chest ache. When the meal ended and the other boarders retired to their rooms, Vincent lingered, helping Catherine clear the table despite her protests. "You're a paying guest, Mr. Vance. You don't need to work." "My mother raised me to help with dishes. Besides, I thought we might talk." She paused, a stack of plates in her hands, uncertainty flickering across her face. Talk about what? Anything, everything, how you ended up in Redemption Creek, what you like to read. I noticed books in the parlor that looked well loved, whether you think this spring rain will last. He set his own dishes on her stack, careful not to crowd her. I've been working alone on the ranch for so long I've started talking to my horse. It would be nice to have actual conversation. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. What does your horse say back? Mostly complaints about the grain quality and requests for more rest. He was rewarded with a soft laugh, barely more than a breath, but it felt like victory. See. You're already better company. They carried the dishes to the kitchen, where Widow Morrison took over with a knowing smile, shooing them both away. I'll finish here. Catherine's been working since dawn. She deserves a rest. Katherine looked ready to protest, but the widow was already rolling up her sleeves. Vincent offered his arm with careful formality. Would you walk with me, Miss Holloway, just around the house? The evening's pleasant. She stared at his extended arm as if it were a snake, and he nearly withdrew it, afraid he'd overstepped. But then slowly she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent warmth spreading through his chest. They walked in the fading light, the spring air cool and fresh. For several minutes neither spoke, and Vincent wondered if he'd made a mistake. But then Katherine said quietly, I came to Redemption Creek 3 years ago, after my parents died. I'm sorry, that must have been difficult. It was. But the widow needed help and I needed a place where no one knew me. A fresh start. She paused. Or at least that's what I told myself. But you can't really start fresh when you carry your past on your skin. The scars. She nodded, her hand tightening slightly on his arm. A fire when I was 8. My father was a blacksmith in Kansas. I was helping him in the forge, trying to be useful, and I knocked over a bucket of hot coals. My dress caught fire. Her voice was steady, reciting facts long since accepted. My father saved my life, but he couldn't save my face. After that, I was always the burned girl, the damaged one. You're not damaged. The words came out more forceful than he intended. You survived, you're strong. I'm scarred, Mr. Vance, there's a difference. They'd reached the back of the boarding house, where a small garden was beginning to show spring growth. Vincent stopped, gently turning Katherine to face him. She tried to angle her face away, but he caught her chin with careful fingers, not forcing, just requesting. Look at me, he said softly, please. She did, and he saw the fear in her eyes, the expectation of disgust or pity. Instead, he smiled. I see a woman who works hard every day, who serves others with kindness even when they don't deserve it. Who survived tragedy and built a new life through sheer determination. He let his hand fall away but held her gaze. I see someone remarkable, and yes, I see scars. But they're just part of your story, not the whole of it. Why? The word burst from her lips. Why would you say these things? Why would you look at me this way? What way? Like I'm not, she struggled with the words. Like I'm worth looking at. Vincent's heart cracked at the raw pain in her voice. Because you are, Katherine, may I call you Katherine? She nodded, mute. Katherine, I won't pretend to understand all you've endured, but I know this. The woman standing before me is the most interesting person I've met in Redemption Creek, maybe in all of Wyoming Territory, and I'd like very much to know her better if she'll allow it. Tears gathered in her eyes, catching the last light. I don't understand you, Vincent Vance. I don't entirely understand myself, he admitted with a crooked smile. I came to town to fix a horseshoe. Somehow I've ended up telling a beautiful woman that I'd like to court her if she'll have me. Even though I have no business courting anyone with my ranch on the edge of failure, and the Dalton clan wanting me dead. You think I'm beautiful, her voice was barely audible. You actually mean it. I do, and I'd like to prove it to you if you'll give me the chance. Katherine looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the internal battle playing out behind her eyes. Hope warring with disbelief, longing fighting with fear. Finally, she whispered, one chance. I'll give you one chance to realize you're wrong about me. It wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance he might have hoped for, but Vincent found himself grinning anyway. Then I'll take that chance and prove to you that I'm absolutely right. That night, lying in his rented room, Vincent stared at the ceiling and wondered what he'd just done. He had no money, no security, no future to offer. The ranch was failing, and the Daltons were just waiting for an opportunity to finish what they'd started. Courting Katherine now was potentially the most selfish thing he could do. What if he let her hope, let her care, and then lost everything? Or worse, what if the Dalton trouble touched her? But even as the doubts circled, he remembered the look in her eyes when he'd called her beautiful. The desperate, fragile hope, the way her hand had trembled on his arm as they walked. Katherine Holloway believed she was unworthy of love, that her scars made her less than whole. And Vincent realized, lying there in the dark, that he carried his own scars, invisible ones carved by loss and responsibility and the constant fight to survive. He'd convinced himself that love was a luxury, that the frontier demanded he face it alone. Maybe they were both wrong. Maybe two scarred, struggling people could find in each other what they couldn't find in isolation. Proof that survival wasn't the same as living, and that love might be not a luxury but a necessity, as vital as water in the desert. The next morning, Vincent got his horse shod and prepared to return to the ranch. But before he left, he found Katherine in the boarding house garden, tending to early seedlings. "I have to go back," he said, "but I'll return in 2 weeks. Will you have supper with me?" "A proper supper, just the two of us." Katherine straightened, dirt on her hands, hope and fear still warring in her expression. "You'll come back." "I promise. Men make promises. I keep mine." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 2 weeks, but Vincent, don't come back if this is kindness. Don't come back if you feel obligated. I'd rather be alone than be someone's good deed. He stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "I'm coming back because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met. Because your voice is the last thing I hear before I fall asleep and the first thing I remember when I wake. Because when I look at you, I see everything I didn't know I was hoping to find." He paused. "Is that clear enough?" Her breath caught. "Yes." "Good." He allowed himself a smile. "Then I'll see you in 2 weeks, Katherine Holloway, and I'll bring flowers because that's what a man does when he's courting a woman he admires." He left her standing in the garden, her hand pressed to her heart, her eyes wide with wonder. The 2 weeks that followed were both the longest and shortest of Vincent's life. He worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, tending the small herd he had left, trying to stretch every dollar. But now the work had purpose beyond mere survival. He was building towards something, working for something, fighting for a future that included Katherine's smile and the possibility of not facing each day alone. On the 13th day, 3 riders appeared on his property. Vincent recognized them immediately, Dalton men, including the ones who'd confronted him in Redemption Creek. "Vance," the leader called out as Vincent emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively near his holstered gun. "We've got a message from Marcus Dalton." Marcus was the patriarch of the Dalton clan, a hard man who'd built his empire through cattle and wasn't above using intimidation to expand it. Vincent faced the riders with his heart pounding but his expression steady. "I'm listening. Mr. Dalton's willing to make you an offer. He'll pay fair price for your land and you walk away clean. No more trouble, no more threats. You just leave the territory and forget you ever had a ranch here." "And if I refuse?" The rider's smile was unpleasant. "Then we stop being polite about wanting you gone. Accidents happen on ranches, Vance. Fences get cut. Cattle go missing, buildings burn." Vincent felt cold rage settle in his gut. "You're threatening me on my own land." "We're making you an offer. Smart man would take it." "Get off my property." Vincent's voice was quiet but hard as iron. "And tell Marcus Dalton that this ranch isn't for sale, not to him, not to anyone. My father built this place with his own hands, and I'm not abandoning it because some cattle baron wants to expand his empire. Your brother should have thought about consequences before he killed Jake Dalton. My brother acted in self-defense. Jake drew first, every witness said so. Daltons don't care about witnesses, we care about family." The rider turned his horse. "You've got 1 week to reconsider, Vance. After that, we stop asking nice." They rode away and Vincent stood watching them go, his hands clenched into fists. He should be afraid, probably was afraid if he was honest, but overlaying the fear was fury. The Daltons didn't just threaten his ranch. They threatened his ability to build a future, to become a man worthy of courting Katherine, to be anything other than another broken cowboy fleeing west ahead of his troubles. He wouldn't run. Whatever else happened, he wouldn't run. When Vincent rode into Redemption Creek the following day, he carried wildflowers picked from the prairie and a tight knot of determination in his chest. He wouldn't burden Katherine with the Dalton trouble, wouldn't let that shadow touch her. Tonight was about keeping his promise, about showing her that someone could see her worth and return for it. Katherine was waiting in the boarding house parlor, and Vincent's breath caught at the sight of her. She wore a dress of deep blue, not her usual shapeless gray, that actually fit her slender frame. Her dark hair was arranged in a softer style, with tendrils framing her face. She'd made no attempt to hide her scars, and he was glad. She stood straighter than he'd seen before, though her hands twisted together nervously. "You came back," she said, as if she'd doubted it until this moment. "I made a promise." He offered the flowers with a slight bow. "These don't do you justice, but they're the best Wyoming Territory had to offer." She took them with trembling hands, bringing them to her face to inhale their scent. "They're perfect." "No one's ever," she trailed off, and he saw her blinking back tears. "Katherine," he waited until she looked at him. "This is just the beginning. I intend to bring you flowers until you believe you deserve them." Widow Morrison had prepared a private dinner in the small dining room, leaving them alone with promises to check in only to deliver food. It was perhaps slightly scandalous, but the widow seemed to have decided Vincent's intentions were honorable, and Katherine needed someone to take her side for once. Over roast chicken and spring vegetables they talked, really talked. Katherine told him about her childhood before the fire, about her father's blacksmith shop and her mother's garden. About the books she'd read 100 times because they were her only escape. About the loneliness of being the person others looked past or looked away from. Vincent shared his own struggles, the pressure of trying to save his family's legacy alone, the guilt over his brother's flight, the constant fight against weather and thieves, and his own inexperience. The fear that he was fighting a losing battle and too stubborn to admit it. "Why not sell?" Katherine asked quietly. "If it's so hard, why not take whatever you can get and start fresh somewhere else?" "Because running away doesn't solve anything. My brother ran, and all it did was leave me holding the consequences." Vincent set down his fork, his jaw tight. "I'm tired of the frontier taking everything from people. I'm tired of good people losing to bad men just because the bad men have more money or guns. If I give up the ranch, I'm admitting that hard work and honest living don't matter. That only power and cruelty win." "That's the world we live in, though," Katherine said, but there was a question in her voice, a desire to be convinced otherwise. "Maybe, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe if enough people stop running, stop hiding, stop accepting that they're worth less than they are, the world starts to change." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough to feel her warmth. "You ask me why I'd choose to see you, to court you. Turn that question around, Katherine. Why do you choose to see yourself as less than you are? Because cruel people said so, because life was unfair. Those are the same forces trying to drive me off my ranch, and I refuse to let them win." She stared at him, her eyes bright. "You make it sound simple." "Not simple but clear. I know what I'm fighting for now." His voice dropped. "Or rather, who?" The air between them felt charged, intimate. Katherine's hand moved across the table, her fingers brushing his. The contact was electric. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid to believe you, afraid to hope." "I know. But I'll keep coming back, keep showing up, until you're more afraid of missing this chance than of taking it." They talked until the candles burned low, until Widow Morrison had long since retired, and the boarding house settled into sleep around them. Vincent learned that Katherine loved poetry, but thought most poets had never done a day's real work. That she'd taught herself to cook out of necessity and found unexpected joy in it. That she dreamed, sometimes, of having a garden of her own, a place where she could grow beautiful things. "I could give you that," Vincent said impulsively. "The ranch has space for a garden, a big one. You could grow anything you wanted." Katherine's breath caught. "Vincent, you barely know me." "I know enough. I know that you're brave and kind and stronger than you believe. I know that I ride 20 miles hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I know that when I think about the future, about saving the ranch and building something lasting, you're there, you're in that picture." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight." I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, possibly, we could build something together. A future, a home. You're talking about love, her voice trembled. You're talking about love when we've barely had 3 real conversations. I'm talking about the possibility of love. About the fact that I'm already halfway there and falling faster every time I see you. He lifted her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Tell me I'm alone in this. Tell me you feel nothing, and I'll walk away. I'll leave you in peace. I can't tell you that. The admission seemed torn from her. I can't tell you that because when you rode away 2 weeks ago, I counted every day, every hour. I stood at that window watching the road like a fool, terrified you wouldn't come back and equally terrified you would. Because if you came back, I'd have to face the possibility that you meant what you said. That someone could actually want me, scars and all. Katherine, let me finish. She pulled her hand back, standing abruptly and moving to the window. You think you know what you're offering, but you don't. Choosing me means everyone in this town will whisper about you. It means people will think you're either desperate or strange. It means children will stare and women will pity you for being stuck with the scarred girl. Her reflection in the dark glass showed tears streaming down her face. I won't be the reason people think less of you. Vincent stood and crossed to her, turning her gently to face him. I don't give a damn what people think. Let them whisper, let them stare. Katherine, before I met you, I was just surviving, just going through the motions. You've given me something to fight for beyond obligation. You've made me want to build a future instead of just defending the past. Why would you choose me? The question burst from her, raw and desperate. There are other women, whole women, pretty women without. Because you're my Swan, he said simply. She stared at him, confused. What? You know the story, the ugly duckling who grows into a swan. Except it's backwards because you were never ugly, never less than, you just couldn't see it. Everyone else was too blind to look properly. He cupped her scarred cheek with his palm, his touch infinitely gentle. But I see you, Katherine, I see the real you. And you're the most beautiful thing in my world. She broke then, sobbing against his chest as he held her carefully, mindfully, like the precious thing she was. Years of loneliness, rejection, and forced isolation poured out in those tears. And Vincent held her through all of it, murmuring reassurances, making promises he'd die before breaking. When the storm passed, Katherine pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes with embarrassment. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, not for this, not for being honest. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Katherine, I need to tell you something. It's not good news, and I don't want secrets between us. She tensed. What is it? He told her about the Daltons, about the threats and the ultimatum. He watched her face pale with fear and hated that he'd put that expression there. You have to sell, she said immediately. Vincent, you have to take their offer. These aren't idle threats. I can't, I won't. Then you'll die, they'll kill you, and for what? For land. For the future, for the right to build something good without running from bullies. He gripped her shoulders firmly. Katherine, if I run from the Daltons, I prove that might makes right. That good people should just roll over and accept whatever the powerful decide. Is that the world you want to live in? I want to live in a world where you're alive. I'll be careful, I'll be smart, but I won't run. He softened his tone. Do you understand? I spent my whole life watching my father build something honest, something good. Then he died, my brother ran, and I was left holding the pieces. If I abandon the ranch, it means everything my father worked for meant nothing. That his values, his belief in hard work and integrity, were just pretty lies. Or it means you're smart enough to know when you're beaten. I'm not beaten. Not yet, and Katherine, he waited until she met his eyes. I'm fighting for more than the ranch now. I'm fighting for the possibility of us. For the chance to bring you to that land as my wife, to build a home where you can have your garden and we can have a life. If I give up the ranch, I give up that dream. I give up believing I'm worthy of you. You're worthy of me because you're a good man, not because you own land. Maybe, but I need to be a man who stands for something. Who doesn't run when things get hard. He pulled her close again, resting his chin on her hair. I need to be someone worthy of the bravest woman I know, the one who faces rejection every day and still shows up, still tries, still has the courage to hope even when hope seems foolish. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet boarding house. Finally, Katherine whispered against his chest, I don't want to lose you, I just found you. You won't, I promise. It was a promise he desperately hoped he could keep. Vincent returned to the ranch the next morning, but now he and Katherine had an understanding. He would send letters when he could, and she would write back. He'd visit every 2 weeks if circumstances allowed. They were courting officially, properly, building toward a future neither had quite dared imagine before. The week passed tense and watchful. Vincent kept his rifle close and his eyes on the horizon. He checked fences twice daily, varied his routines, and slept lightly. The Daltons would come, he had no illusions about that. The only question was when and how. The answer came on the 8th day at dawn. Vincent smelled smoke before he saw flames. He bolted from the ranch house to find his barn ablaze, the horses screaming in panic. Without thinking, he rushed inside through the wall of heat and smoke, leading out the terrified animals one by one. The last horse, his father's old gelding, was trapped in a back stall. Vincent plunged deeper into the inferno, his lungs burning, his skin blistering from the heat. He got the horse free and stumbled outside just as the barn's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. He fell to his knees in the dirt, coughing violently, watching everything burn. Riders appeared on the ridge overlooking his property. Even through watering eyes, Vincent recognized the Dalton men. They sat watching for a moment, their message clear, then turned and rode away. Vincent knelt in the dirt until the fire burned itself out, leaving nothing but ashes and twisted metal. The barn was gone. His equipment, his winter feed stores, everything, gone. The horses had survived, but they'd need shelter before winter, and he had no money to rebuild. The smart move would be to accept defeat. Sell to the Daltons, take what money they offered, and leave, start over somewhere else. Cut his losses. Instead, Vincent stood, his jaw set with determination. He'd sleep in the ranch house with his rifle beside him. He'd build a temporary shelter for the horses using salvaged lumber. He'd find a way forward, because surrendering meant proving the Daltons right, that violence and intimidation won. That good people should just accept whatever the powerful decided they deserved. And he'd do it because Katherine Holloway had looked at him with hope in her eyes and dared to believe someone might choose her. If she could be that brave, face every day despite her scars and society's cruelty, then he could damn well stand up to cattle-baron thugs. He didn't write to Katherine about the fire. Didn't want her to worry, didn't want her to feel responsible. But somehow, 2 days later, she appeared at his ranch in Widow Morrison's wagon, her face white with fury. "The Daltons are bragging about it in town," she said without preamble, climbing down from the wagon seat. "About how they taught you a lesson, how you'll be selling soon." She marched up to him, her eyes blazing. "You didn't tell me. I didn't want you to worry." "Too late for that," she gestured at the burned ruins. "Vincent, this is madness. They could have killed you, they still might. They want me scared, want me to sell. I won't give them that satisfaction." "Then you're a fool," her voice cracked. "A brave, stubborn, infuriating fool." He caught her arms gently. "Katherine, I need to do this. Not because of pride, but because some things are worth fighting for. Some stands need to be made. Even if it gets you killed. I won't let that happen, I'm being careful. Careful, your barn burned down. And I saved the horses. I survived, I'm still here, still standing." He pulled her closer, his voice intense. "I'm still fighting for our future." Tears spilled down her cheeks. What future? Vincent, be realistic. Without the barn, without equipment, how will you make enough money to keep the ranch? The bank won't wait forever. "I'll figure it out, I have to." But even as he said it, Vincent felt the weight of reality pressing down. She was right. The barn fire had taken more than buildings. It had taken his chances of profitability this year. Even if he worked himself to death, he couldn't rebuild and maintain the herd and make enough to satisfy the bank. He was going to lose everything anyway. The Daltons had won. The defeat must have shown on his face because Katherine's expression shifted from anger to heartbreak. "Come with me," she said quietly. "Come back to Redemption Creek. We'll figure something else out." "And do what? I'm a rancher." "It's all I know." "So you'll be a rancher somewhere else. We'll save money, and in a few years we'll buy land in another territory." She gripped his shirt. "I don't care about the ranch, Vincent. I care about you. Alive. Safe. If I leave, I'm running. I'm admitting they won. Then let them win. Better they win than you die for pride." "It's not pride." He pulled away, frustration making his voice sharp. "Can't you understand? If I run from this, I prove that bullies always win. That threatening violence is an acceptable way to get what you want. I prove that a man like me, trying to do right, trying to build something honest, doesn't matter. That only power and cruelty matter. And if you die, you prove the same thing. Dead martyrs don't change the world, Vincent. They're just dead. He had no answer for that. Katherine was right, intellectually, logically, practically right. But something in his chest, in his soul, rebelled against the idea of surrender. His father had taught him to stand for what was right even when standing was hard. His mother had raised him to believe that good people, working together, could build something better than a world ruled by fear. If he gave up now, he betrayed everything they'd taught him. But if he kept fighting and got killed, he betrayed Katherine's hope and his own promise of a future together. He was trapped between two impossible choices, and he didn't know which would destroy him more completely. That night, Katherine refused to leave. She insisted on staying at the ranch, helping him build a temporary shelter for the horses. They worked side by side in tense silence, the burned barn ruins a constant reminder of what they were up against. When darkness fell, Katherine made a simple meal from the supplies she'd brought. They ate in the ranch house kitchen, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. "I should go back in the morning," Katherine finally said. "Widow Morrison will worry." "I know, but I don't want to leave you here alone." Vincent reached across the table, taking her hand. "I don't want you in danger. If the Daltons come back and you're here, then we face them together." "Katherine." No, her voice was firm. "You want to fight for your principles, for your father's legacy, for our future. Fine, but you don't get to do it alone. You don't get to make decisions about us without me." He stared at her, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. "When did you get so fierce?" "When I found something worth fighting for." She squeezed his hand. "You asked me to believe I was worthy to stop hiding. Well, I'm trying, and part of that is standing up for what I want. I want you, Vincent Vance, alive and whole and with me. If that means facing down the Daltons, then I'll do it." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. You've spent weeks telling me I'm braver than I believe. Time to prove you right." Vincent felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot that had lived there since his father died. He'd been fighting alone for so long, convinced that real strength meant never needing anyone. But looking at Katherine now, her chin raised defiantly despite the fear in her eyes, he realized he'd been wrong. Strength wasn't refusing help. Strength was accepting it, building something with someone instead of battling alone. "All right," he said quietly, "but we do this smart, we get help, we find allies." "Who?" "Sheriff Porter, for one. The Daltons might be powerful, but arson's a crime. And there are other small ranchers in the territory dealing with the same pressure. Maybe it's time we stopped facing them separately." Hope flickered in Katherine's eyes. "You think they'd help?" "Only one way to find out." They spent that night making plans instead of giving in to despair. Katherine slept in the ranch house guest room, properly chaperoned by 100 feet of empty prairie, and Vincent lay awake thinking about how his entire world had shifted. He'd started this journey trying to save his father's ranch alone. Now he was building something new, a partnership, a future that included someone else's dreams and fears alongside his own. The next morning they rode together to Redemption Creek. Vincent met with Sheriff Porter while Katherine gathered supplies. The meeting was both encouraging and sobering. "I suspected the Daltons were behind the fire," Porter said, leaning back in his chair. "But suspecting and proving are different things. Those men who rode on your property, you said they just watched." "That's right. So no direct evidence they set the fire. Could claim they were just passing through, saw the smoke." The sheriff shook his head. "Marcus Dalton's careful, always has been. He doesn't do his own dirty work, and he makes sure there's no solid proof. So I'm just supposed to accept it. Wait for them to burn down my house next." "I didn't say that." Porter studied him with tired eyes. "I said proof is hard, but that doesn't mean we can't make life difficult for them. I'll increase patrols near your ranch. And you're right about the other small ranchers. They're facing the same pressure. Maybe it's time for a meeting, get everyone together. There's safety in numbers and witnesses." "You think it would help?" "Can't hurt." "And Vincent," the sheriff's voice turned serious. "Between you and me, I'm glad you're not backing down. Men like the Daltons only have power because good folks are too scared to stand against them. Time someone reminded them that fear doesn't last forever. The meeting took place 1 week later in the Redemption Creek Church. 8 small ranchers attended, plus Sheriff Porter and several townspeople sympathetic to their cause. Vincent stood at the front, painfully aware of Katherine sitting in the front pew, her presence giving him courage. "The Daltons have been squeezing us out one by one," Vincent said. "Burning buildings, stealing cattle, making threats. They're counting on us being too afraid to fight back, too isolated to help each other. I say we prove them wrong." "Easy for you to say," one rancher grumbled. "You're young, unattached. Some of us have families to protect." "He's not unattached," Katherine said clearly, standing up. Every eye in the room turned to her, and Vincent saw her falter for just a moment before lifting her chin. "Vincent and I are courting, so he has just as much to lose as anyone." Murmurs rippled through the room. Vincent saw the stares, the whispers, people noticing Katherine's scars and making assumptions about Vincent's desperation. His jaw tightened, but Katherine shot him a warning glance. She'd expected this. She was choosing to face it. "Miss Holloway's right," Vincent said firmly. "I have plenty to lose, but I'll lose it all anyway if the Daltons succeed. We all will, so I'm proposing we work together. Coordinate patrols, share information, present a united front. Make it clear that attacking one of us means attacking all of us." "And if that makes them attack harder," another rancher asked, "then at least we fight together instead of getting picked off alone." The debate raged for an hour, but slowly, reluctantly, the ranchers agreed to Vincent's plan. They'd coordinate watch schedules, share resources for rebuilding Vincent's barn, and most importantly, they'd stand witness for each other. If the Daltons wanted to keep using intimidation, they'd have to do it in front of multiple witnesses willing to testify. It wasn't a perfect solution. The Daltons still had more money, more men, more power, but it was something. It was resistance instead of submission. As the meeting broke up, several ranchers approached Vincent to shake his hand or clap his shoulder. Others approached Katherine, offering congratulations on the courtship with varying degrees of sincerity. Vincent watched her handle each interaction with quiet grace, her shoulders straight despite the stares. When they were finally alone, walking back to the boarding house in the late afternoon sun, Vincent said quietly, "Thank you for speaking up." "That took courage." "I'm tired of hiding," Katherine replied, "and you were right, some stands need to be made. Even if people talk. Let them talk, I'm choosing to believe I'm worth choosing." She glanced at him with a small, brave smile. "Someone once convinced me I might be a swan instead of an ugly duckling. Seemed ashamed to waste that." Vincent laughed, pulling her into a brief, impulsive embrace right there on the street. He didn't care who saw, who whispered. Katherine was his and he was hers, and the whole frontier could know it. "Marry me," he said impulsively. She pulled back, eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me. I know it's fast. I know I should wait and court you properly for a year like a gentleman, but Katherine, life's too short and too uncertain. I love you, I want to build a future with you. Marry me." "Vincent, you're in the middle of a war with the Daltons. Your ranch is barely surviving. You can't." "I can, I am. Those are exactly the reasons we should marry now. Because tomorrow's not guaranteed, and I don't want to waste time on propriety when I could be spending it with you." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, marry me." "You love me," she said it like testing the words, tasting their truth. "With everything I am. You're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. You make me want to be better, do better, fight harder. You're my future, Katherine, if you'll have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes. Yes, you foolish, wonderful man, yes." He kissed her then, right there on Main Street in full view of anyone who cared to watch. It was Katherine's first kiss, and Vincent poured everything into it: promise, passion, determination, love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Katherine was smiling through her tears. "When?" she whispered. "As soon as possible, this Sunday if the Reverend will do it." "That's 5 days away." "Too long already." She laughed, the sound bright and free and full of joy. "Then Sunday it is." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Widow Morrison threw herself into planning a small celebration with the enthusiasm of a woman who'd been waiting for Katherine to find happiness. The other ranchers, pleased by the show of unity from the meeting, offered what help they could with rebuilding. And then, 3 days before the wedding, Marcus Dalton himself rode into town. He was an imposing man in his 50s, gray-haired and hard-eyed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and walked in like he owned the place. Vincent, who'd been discussing security arrangements with Sheriff Porter, stood as Dalton entered. "Mr. Vance," Dalton said pleasantly, "I thought it was time we talked man to man." "We have nothing to discuss." "I think we do. You've been organizing the small ranchers, making it harder for me to expand my operations. That's bad for business. Your business involves intimidation and arson. I'm not particularly concerned with helping it succeed." Dalton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm willing to offer double what I initially proposed for your land." "That's more than fair. My land's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mr. Vance. The question is price." Dalton's voice hardened slightly. "You're getting married in 3 days, I hear, to the scarred girl from the boarding house." "Touching, really. But have you considered what married life looks like if you're constantly watching over your shoulder? If your new bride is afraid every time you leave the house that you won't come back?" Vincent's hands clenched into fists. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm pointing out reality. Accidents happen, Mr. Vance, to ranchers, to buildings, to people. I'd hate for your new bride to become a widow before she's properly a wife." "That's enough," Sheriff Porter said sharply. "Mr. Dalton, you've made your offer. Mr. Vance has declined. Time for you to leave." Dalton stood smoothly. "Think about it, Vance. You have until your wedding day. After that, I'll assume your answer is final and act accordingly." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy and walked out. In the silence that followed, Vincent's heart hammered against his ribs. The threat had been clear and direct. Accept the offer or face consequences, not just to him but potentially to Katherine. "You could postpone the wedding," Sheriff Porter said quietly. "Give yourself time to think." "No," Vincent's voice was firm. "I won't let him control my life, won't let fear make my decisions." But as he walked back to the boarding house, doubt gnawed at him. Was he being brave or foolish, principled or selfish? By marrying Katherine, was he protecting her by giving her a home and partner, or was he putting her directly in the line of fire? Katherine met him at the door, taking one look at his face and leading him to the parlor. What happened? He told her everything, watched the color drain from her face as she processed Dalton's threat. When he finished, she sat very still for a long moment. "He's trying to scare you into selling," she finally said. "He's succeeding." "Vincent." "Not scared for me, for you." He gripped her hands tightly. "Katherine, if something happened to you because of my stubbornness, because I refused to back down, then it would be Dalton's fault, not yours." Her voice was firm. "Vincent, listen to me. All my life I've let fear make my choices. Fear of rejection, fear of pain, fear of being hurt. I hid behind my scars and called it wisdom. Called it being realistic." She squeezed his hands. "Then you came along and made me want to be brave, made me want to fight for something better. You don't get to turn around now and tell me we should surrender to fear." "This is different. Dalton's dangerous. So is living half a life, so is giving up on the possibility of happiness because someone threatens it." She stood, pulling him up with her. "We're getting married on Sunday. We're standing together. And if Marcus Dalton doesn't like it, that's his problem, not ours." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She cupped his face, her touch gentle. "You taught me that I'm worthy of being chosen, that my scars don't define me. Now I'm teaching you something. Love doesn't make you weak, Vincent. It makes you stronger. We're stronger together than either of us could be alone." He kissed her then, pouring gratitude and fear and love into the contact. She was right. He'd been so focused on protecting her that he'd forgotten his own lesson, that hiding from life wasn't the same as living it. "Sunday," he said against her lips. "Sunday," she confirmed. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. Vincent spent them at the ranch with 3 other ranchers standing guard, rebuilding what they could of the barn. Katherine stayed in town, finalizing preparations with Widow Morrison and trying not to jump at every sound. Saturday night, Vincent broke protocol and stayed at the boarding house. He and Katherine sat up late in the parlor talking about their future, about the garden she'd plant, the children they hoped to have, the life they'd build together. It was a deliberate act of hope, of refusing to let Dalton's threats steal their dreams. I'm afraid, Katherine admitted as midnight approached. Not of marrying you, of losing you right after I find you. You won't lose me, I'm too stubborn to die young. Promise me something, she gripped his hand tightly. Promise me that if things get too dangerous, if the Daltons escalate past the point of safety, you'll consider selling. I meant what I said about fighting for our future, but Vincent, I need you alive more than I need any particular piece of land. He wanted to refuse, to insist he'd never surrender. But looking into her eyes, he saw the genuine fear there, the knowledge of how fragile life could be. She'd already lost her parents. She was asking him not to make her lose him too. I promise, he said quietly. If it comes to a choice between the land and your safety, I'll choose you, always. Good, she leaned against his shoulder. Then whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. The church filled with people, more than Vincent had expected. The ranchers and their families, townspeople who'd grown fond of Katherine or respected Vincent's stand, even a few of the merchants who decided that supporting the small ranchers was good business. Sheriff Porter stood near the back, his hand never far from his gun. He'd positioned 2 deputies outside, just in case. Vincent stood at the altar in his best suit, his heart pounding as he watched Katherine walk down the aisle on Widow Morrison's arm. She wore a simple white dress that the widow had helped her sew, her dark hair arranged with wildflowers. She'd made no attempt to hide her scars, and the sunlight streaming through the church windows illuminated her face in a way that stole Vincent's breath. She was radiant, absolutely radiant. As she reached the altar and took his hands, Vincent whispered, "You're beautiful." "So are you," she whispered back, her eyes shining. The Reverend began the ceremony, his voice sonorous and formal. Vincent barely heard the words. He was too focused on Katherine, on the miracle that she was here, choosing him, believing in their future despite every reason to be afraid. "Do you, Vincent Charles Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Katherine Ann Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Vincent pulled Katherine close and kissed her as thoroughly as propriety allowed, which wasn't very thoroughly at all but still managed to make her blush and the congregation chuckle. When they broke apart, both grinning, the church erupted in applause. They were married. Against all odds, despite threats and fears and the general harshness of frontier life, they were married. The celebration at the boarding house was simple but joyful. Widow Morrison had prepared a feast, and the ranchers had brought what they could spare. There was music and dancing, laughter and genuine happiness. For a few hours, the threat of the Daltons seemed distant, irrelevant. Katherine danced with Vincent, then with Sheriff Porter, then with several of the ranchers. Vincent watched her glowing with happiness, talking and laughing without her habitual hunching or hair hiding, and felt his chest swell with pride and love. "She's good for you," Sheriff Porter commented, appearing at Vincent's elbow. "You both look happy." "We are, more than I thought possible." "Good, hold on to that." The sheriff's voice turned serious, "but stay vigilant. Dalton's not going to let this go. I know, but we'll face it together." As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Vincent and Katherine left the boarding house amid cheers and well wishes. They decided to spend their wedding night at the ranch, their ranch now, their home together. The ride was quiet but comfortable, Katherine sitting in front of Vincent on his horse, leaning back against his chest. The stars came out one by one, brilliant in the clear sky. "I never thought I'd have this," Katherine said softly. "A husband, a home, a future. Neither did I, turns out. We were both wrong about what we deserved. The ugly duckling got her Swan." Vincent smiled against her hair. "Got it backwards, my love. I'm the one who got the Swan. You're the beautiful thing in this story. I'm just the lucky fool who recognized it." They arrived at the ranch to find it quiet and peaceful. No signs of trouble, no threats manifesting from the darkness. Just their home waiting for them to begin their life together. Inside, Vincent had prepared the house as best he could. Fresh linens, candles, wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. It wasn't much, but Katherine's eyes filled with tears at the sight. "You did this for me." "For us," he pulled her close. "Everything I do now is for us." That night they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal care. Catherine's scars didn't matter, had never mattered except as proof of her strength. Vincent showed her with every touch, every whispered word, that she was desired, cherished, loved completely. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the darkness, Katherine traced patterns on Vincent's chest. "I was so afraid," she admitted, "so certain that this would never happen for me, that I'd always be alone." "You'll never be alone again. I promise you that. I love you, Vincent Vance. I love you, Katherine Vance," he smiled at using her new name. "My wife." "Your Swan," she corrected teasingly. "My Swan," he agreed. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, happy and hopeful and completely unprepared for what the next morning would bring. Vincent woke to the sound of hoofbeats, many hoofbeats. He was out of bed and reaching for his gun before his eyes were fully open. Katherine sat up, alarmed, clutching the sheet to her chest. "Stay inside," Vincent ordered, pulling on his pants. "No matter what happens, stay in the house." "Vincent. Please, Katherine, trust me." He grabbed his rifle and went to the window. His blood ran cold. At least a dozen riders surrounded the house, all armed, all wearing the Dalton brand on their gear. And at the front, mounted on a black gelding, sat Marcus Dalton himself. "Vance," Dalton called out, "time's up, come out and let's settle this." Vincent checked his ammunition, his mind racing. He was outnumbered and outgunned. If he stepped outside, they'd likely kill him and claim he drew first. If he stayed inside, they might burn the house with Katherine inside. He was trapped. Behind him, Katherine had dressed and now stood by the bedroom door, her face pale but determined. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but Katherine, if something happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen to you. If it does, you run. There's a horse in the temporary shelter. You ride for town and you don't look back. I'm not leaving you." "Katherine." "No," she crossed to him, gripping his arm. "You promised we'd face this together. I'm holding you to that." Before Vincent could respond, another sound rose above the hoofbeats, more horses, coming fast from the direction of town. Both he and Katherine rushed to the front window. Sheriff Porter led a group of 8 men, all armed, all riding hard toward the ranch. And behind them came the small ranchers, at least a dozen of them, with their hands on their guns and determination on their faces. They'd come, the community had come. "Dalton!" Sheriff Porter reined up between the house and Dalton's men, his rifle prominently displayed. "What's the meaning of this?" "Private business, Sheriff, between me and Vance." "Private business doesn't involve 12 armed men surrounding a house. That's called intimidation, possibly attempted murder." Porter glanced at the ranchers flanking him. "Seems Mr. Vance has friends. And they're not inclined to let you conduct your private business unobserved." Dalton's face darkened. "This doesn't concern you or these dirt farmers." "It concerns all of us," one of the ranchers called out. "We're tired of your threats, Dalton. Tired of you thinking you can run roughshod over decent folks." "You're on my land." "This is Vance land," Porter interrupted. "Legally owned and defended. Now you and your men are going to turn around and ride out. And if I hear of any more buildings burning, any more cattle going missing, any more mysterious accidents, I'll be coming for you with a federal marshal at my back." "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not today, but I'll keep trying." "And Dalton," Porter's voice turned hard as iron, "these folks aren't isolated anymore. They're united, watching out for each other. That's going to make your expansion plans a lot harder." For a long moment, the standoff held. Dalton's men outnumbered the sheriff's group, but barely, and the small ranchers looked ready to fight if necessary. Vincent held his breath, Katherine's hand tight in his, waiting for someone to make a move that would turn this confrontation deadly. Finally, Dalton smiled coldly. "This isn't over." "It is for today," Porter replied. "Ride out Dalton now." With obvious reluctance, Dalton signaled his men. They turned their horses and rode away, taking their threat with them. As soon as they were out of sight, Vincent's legs went weak with relief. He pulled Katherine against him, holding her tight. "They came," Katherine whispered. "Everyone came." They did. Vincent looked out at the assembled ranchers and townspeople, his throat tight with emotion. "They really did." Sheriff Porter dismounted and approached the house. Vincent met him on the porch, Katherine at his side. "Thank you," Vincent said, his voice rough. if you hadn't arrived when you did. We've been watching, had men posted on the road since last night, just in case Dalton tried something. Porter looked at the assembled ranchers. Turns out your idea about unity was a good one. Word spreads fast when folks are looking out for each other. One of the ranchers rode up, an older man named Jakob Meyer. The Daltons might think twice now, knowing they can't pick us off one by one. We stand together, we got a chance. A chance is all we need, Vincent replied. A chance to build something good. To prove that decent people can make a life out here. Over the next few weeks, the small ranchers proved their commitment to unity. They established regular patrols, shared resources, and made it clear that any attack on one would be met by all. The Daltons made a few more probing attempts, cut fences, strayed cattle, but nothing major, nothing that crossed the line into overt violence. Gradually, an uneasy peace settled over the territory. Vincent threw himself into rebuilding with the help of his neighbors. The barn went up again, sturdier than before. The herd began to grow as he carefully invested every spare dollar in quality cattle. And through it all, Katherine was at his side, managing the household, tending her growing garden, proving herself as capable and strong as he'd always known her to be. By the time summer arrived, the ranch was thriving in ways Vincent had thought impossible months before. Not wealthy, not secure, but surviving, growing, building toward something lasting. One evening, Vincent found Katherine in her garden, kneeling among the vegetables and flowers she'd coaxed from the harsh prairie soil. The setting sun turned her hair to burnished gold, and when she looked up at him, her smile was radiant. "Come see," she said, beckoning him closer. "The roses are blooming." He knelt beside her, admiring the delicate pink blooms. "You brought beauty to rough land, made something gorgeous grow where people said nothing good could take root." "We did it together," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without your support, without you believing in me." "Katherine, there's something I need to tell you." He took her hands, suddenly nervous. "The bank contacted me last week. We're current on all payments. In fact, if we have another season as good as this one, we'll pay off the loan early. The ranch is secure." Her eyes widened. "Vincent, that's wonderful." "It is, but it means something else, too. It means I can finally give you everything I promised. Security, a future, a real home." He pulled her closer, his voice dropping to something tender. "It means I can finally feel worthy of you. You were always worthy." Long before the ranch was secure or the Daltons backed off, she cupped his face, her touch gentle. "You were worthy when you first saw me, truly saw me, and chose to look past what everyone else couldn't get beyond. When you stood up for me when no one else would. When you believed I was a swan when I still felt like an ugly duckling." "You were never a duckling," I meant what I said. "I know, and I finally believe it." She smiled through sudden tears. "It took time and your patience and a lot of love, but I believe it now. I'm worthy of being chosen because I'm me, scars and all." Vincent kissed her then, long and deep, tasting salt and joy and the absolute rightness of this moment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Katherine whispered, "I have news too." "What's that?" "I'm with child." The world seemed to stop. Vincent stared at her, processing the words, and then he was laughing and crying and spinning her around, whooping with joy. Katherine laughed with him, her happiness matching his own. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby." "We are our family, Vincent. We're building our family." He set her down carefully, as if she might break, and Katherine laughed at his sudden overprotective tenderness. "I'm pregnant, not fragile. You're carrying our child. You're the most precious thing in my world." He knelt in her garden, pressing a kiss to her still flat stomach. "We're going to give this child everything, Katherine. Love and security and a world where they're valued for who they are, not what they look like or how much money they have." "We are," she agreed. "And we're going to teach them that being chosen is wonderful, but choosing yourself first, believing you're worthy, that's even more important." They stayed in the garden as the sun set, making plans and dreaming dreams. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the harsh materials of frontier life. The Daltons never came back. Whether it was the united front of the small ranchers, Sheriff Porter's vigilance, or simply a business decision that harassment had become more trouble than it was worth, Marcus Dalton turned his attention elsewhere. The small ranchers continued their cooperation, eventually forming an official collective that gave them better negotiating power with buyers and banks. Catherine's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She glowed with health and happiness, tending her garden and helping Vincent with ranch work until he finally insisted she rest more. Their first child, a daughter, was born on a snowy January morning with Widow Morrison attending as midwife. Vincent held his newborn daughter with trembling hands, marveling at her tiny perfection. She had Catherine's dark hair and his strong features, and she was absolutely beautiful. "What should we name her?" Katherine asked, exhausted but radiant. "Hope," Vincent said immediately. "Hope Vance, because she represents everything we fought for, everything we dared to hope for when hope seemed impossible." "Hope," Katherine repeated, smiling. "It's perfect." Over the years that followed, the Vance Ranch became a place of warmth and welcome in the Wyoming Territory. Vincent and Katherine had 3 more children, 2 sons and another daughter, each one loved and valued for exactly who they were. The ranch prospered through hard work, smart management, and the continued cooperation of the small ranchers' collective. Katherine never stopped tending her garden, which grew more elaborate each year. She also began teaching the ranch children to read, her love of books passed on to a new generation. The scars on her face and neck faded slightly with time but never disappeared. She stopped trying to hide them entirely, wearing them instead as marks of survival, proof of strength. Vincent expanded the ranch gradually, never losing sight of his father's values: honest work, fair dealing, respect for the land and the people who worked it. He became a respected voice in the territory, known for his integrity and his willingness to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Katherine back to the spot where he'd proposed, the garden she'd first planted at the ranch. It had grown wild and beautiful, roses climbing the fence posts, vegetables thriving in neat rows. "Do you remember what you asked me that first day?" Vincent asked, pulling her into his arms. "Why I would choose you." "I remember. I thought I was an ugly duckling asking a foolish question. And I told you that you were my Swan, that I saw you truly." He kissed her forehead. 10 years, 4 children, 1 ranch, and countless challenges later, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I'd choose you again. Every single time, in every possible circumstance. You're still my Swan, Katherine, you always will be." She smiled, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "And you're still the man who saw me when I thought I was invisible. Who chose me when I thought I was unworthy. Who taught me that love isn't about perfection, it's about seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway." "Not anyway," he corrected gently. I choose you because of who you are." "Every part." They stood together in the garden they'd built, on the land they'd defended, surrounded by the life they'd created through courage and love and stubborn determination. The frontier had tested them, scarred them, tried to break them. But they'd survived, more than survived, they'd thrived. Because they'd learned the truth that the harsh Wyoming Territory tried to hide, that love wasn't a luxury to be set aside for safety. It was a necessity, vital as water and air. That 2 broken people could build something whole together. That choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to hope, choosing to believe in worthiness, those were the bravest acts in any territory, wild or settled. And they'd learned that sometimes, the ugly duckling doesn't transform into a swan. Sometimes she was always a swan, just waiting for someone with the wisdom to recognize it. Just as sometimes the lonely cowboy fighting to survive isn't alone because he's unworthy of love, but because he hasn't yet met the person who makes him want to stop fighting alone and start building together. Vincent and Katherine Vance lived long, happy lives on their Wyoming ranch. They saw their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They watched Redemption Creek transform from a rough frontier town into a thriving community. They witnessed the territory become a state, the Wild West gradually tamed. But they never forgot those early days when survival seemed uncertain and the future was just a desperate hope. Those days had forged them, shaped them, made them who they were. The challenges had been real, the dangers genuine, the possibility of failure constant. They'd chosen each other anyway. And in choosing, they'd proven that even in the harshest landscape, even when everything seemed stacked against success, love could not just survive but flourish. Their story became legend in the territory, not because of gunfights or dramatic standoffs, though those had their place, but because it was a story about transformation. About an ugly duckling who learned she was a swan. About a lonely cowboy who discovered that strength came from connection, not isolation. About two scarred, struggling people who looked at each other and saw not damage but possibility. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the home they'd built together, Vincent and Katherine renewed their vows. Vincent was 75, his dark hair gone silver, his lean frame softened by age. Katherine was 73, her scars faded to pale lines, her eyes still bright with intelligence and love. "Why would you choose me?" she asked him teasingly, echoing that first question from so long ago. Vincent smiled, taking her hands in his weathered ones. "Because you're my Swan, you always were, you always will be." And as their family cheered and the Wyoming sun set over the ranch they'd fought to keep, Katherine Vance, once the invisible, scarred girl who thought she was unworthy of love, knew with absolute certainty that she'd been chosen. Not despite her scars, not in spite of her damage, but simply because she was herself. And that was more than enough. It had always been enough. She just needed someone brave enough to see it, and someone even braver to help her see it too. The end.